Good afternoon, I'm Jim Cooper. I'm editor-in-chief at Digiday, and we're at the Affiliate Suite on day 3 of Cannes 2024, and we have an incredible panel to talk about sports and sports marketing and fandom. The title of the panel is The New Sports Fan, How Brands Can Reach Today's Sports Audiences. And again, we have an incredible panel. I'll introduce them, and then we'll get right into it. So first we have Lara Krug, who is the CMO of the Kansas City Chiefs. Shannon Pruitt, who's the CMO of BXP, which is Stagwell Brand Performance Network. Grace Tang, partner and Chief Media Officer at Zambezi. Samir Panah, Bakhtiar, GM Entertainment and Sports at Amazon Web Services. And Michael Kala, Senior VP Executive Producer at Infilions. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
So we had a little bit of a weather situation, so we're inside, but that doesn't mean we can't do some great thought leadership today. So let's start off with an all-play question. I'd love to get each of your quick answer on how you see the definition or the concept of sports fandom evolving over the past couple of years? And we'll start with you, Grace.
Sure. Yeah, actually we were just talking about this outside. So when you look at it from a media perspective, spending has been up for all sports throughout the years. But when you're looking at viewership in terms of the ratings itself, like I know NFL's a little bit different, but for the NBA, for example, it's kind of a little bit smaller. That being said, I mean, it depends on who the teams are playing, but like this past, the Celtics and the Mavs, 12 million isn't nothing to sneeze at, but it wasn't the 20 million that hadn't passed. So basically what's happening, I mean, social, the small clips, there's just more content and just smaller bites all the way through, and then it's going to streaming. So I think with all the changes, again, you see more spending, not necessarily the same ratings, but more consumption overall because of the way people are consuming media now.
Samir?
I think it comes down to the democratization of the tool sets that are available for the production of live events like sports, and it allows the universe of sports to be much more vast than what we've traditionally seen. So I think as we unpack the panel, you'll start to see things like pickleball. I know you were playing that earlier today to be covered. Cricket, as an example, moving to T20, right, to increase the pace of the games. Think about cricket; it's like 2.5 billion fans worldwide, right? When we start to look at coverage for these things, I think it really opens the aperture up about what can be considered fandom and covered relative to sports.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, from a marketing perspective, working with brands and clients, it's really both collapsing around this opportunity to have more access to sports that people love, that have traditionally, like you saw what happened in Long Island with the cricket.
Yes.
Right? It's amazing. And sort of, you're seeing this collapse, this ability to collapse around the sports that people love, but the fragmentation of attention on how they find the sports they love. And so I think this is the thing that's going to start to really play out for people and audiences and fans, right? As we, continue to also, monetization is driving a lot of this. So, but I sort of see those as the two sort of points of opportunity, but also friction as it relates to finding audiences and actually connecting with them.
Yeah, I'll add probably a different pointer and an additional one. I think it's interesting being on the club side and seeing your fans grow, and I think the understanding of who the fans are in the sports world has really changed, and I still think has a huge amount of maturity that still needs to happen. I think about coming from more traditional CPG worlds where we kind of knew everything about the buyer, the shopper, the drinker in my past. When he comes into fan, there's kind of these generalizations. They're like, they're an avid fan, they're a casual fan. It's like, there's a lot more underneath that. I use my husband as a reference all the time. He was born in Kansas City, diehard Chiefs fan, which is ironic in so many ways. But we lived in New York for a really long time. He technically would have been considered casual based on how kind of our fan segmentation used to be set. But I would argue he was probably the most avid and was actually probably spending the most on merch and streaming services and all those things. So I see it's just going to be a lot of evolution, I think, as the ladies have said, that everything is causing a shift to understand the fan more, and I think are going to become, quite frankly, incredibly valuable, even more valuable over the next couple of years.
And to add to that, I think it's more of the traditional passionate fan, and now there's a much more passive fan out there that you can reach in so many ways. I think that's going to be an exciting challenge in the coming years.
So Lara, the Chiefs are in a mid-market in the U.S., but they have a sort of a punch way above that market weight in terms of being a national team. But you also want to make them a global team. How are you going about that?
Yeah, so we're actually I think we're technically the 28th or 29th smallest market out of 32. But based on the latest data that's just come out from YouGov, we're now the #1 team, which is crazy when, to your point about above weight class. Casual fans are being a big driver of that. One of the unique things at the NFL is because there's 32 teams, every team has kind of their designated area. And so once you understand that, you realize that paid media, we were only allowed to really advertise within Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska, so a pretty small space. So if our ambitions are to become the world's team, which they are, and we are on like day one of many, it becomes obviously media content. Our own channels really become our media platform, right? That we're speaking to 20 plus million fans. Earned media, PR, kind of those types of more stunty things that are getting a more national audience becomes a big part of it. And then our international business is a big driver too.
Samira, at Amazon, you've got a lot of insight and a lot of data. So unpack how you are approaching like interactive and immersive tech to really sort of drive sports storytelling. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think if we back up and we look at interactive immersive tech in general, and you look at the game sector more broadly, there's about 3.5 billion people that are playing games each week, over 1.1 million games, like 15 billion play hours. So if you start to take that technology related to how individuals are interacting with content, right, and extend that type of technology into fandom, there's a lot of new product propositions and ways that you can continue to extend the, in venue experience to the home, and it also provides new opportunities for merchandising and monetization as well. So I think as we start to look at things like geospatial technology or advanced visual computing or game tech in general, we start to see the ability to layer these things on to be able to expand the fan experience. I think the most consumable example would be like Apple Vision Pro, being able to extend some of those examples, right, from a physical experience into a digital one, or augmented experiences as well. So I think as you start to look at super fans, maybe not casual viewers, but like the super fans who really want to feel a level of intimacy with the players as an example, these are really unique ways that you can extend that experience.
Great. Grace, Zambezi has a really strong track record in terms of women and women's sports. How do you see that cohort evolving as a fan group, and has the Taylor Swift effect accelerated things, or like how is it shaking out?
So to start, I would say brands are excited, but the challenge has always been ratings, so people wanted to, but it just didn't necessarily pan out in that way. But I think it's changing. So I really think if you look into the history of it, I mean, just even less than 10 years ago, 2016 with pay equity, specifically with women's soccer, I think Megan Rapinoe's actually here. So you guys give her a high five. Yes, exactly, really. And so from then on out, like, so for example, UKG is one of our brands, and I can use that as an example, which is originally we started off with the pay equity message. We sponsored the NWSL, but this year, even before Angel Reese, no, actually before, and Caitlin Clark even happened, we actually sponsored 100% share of voice on the women's March Madness bracket, which we've never even done before. And it was just literally before everything had happened. So there's a shift in terms of dollars, where before it was the pay equity messaging, but now it's just sponsorships, which is where I think we've always wanted to play, but now the numbers are there. So it's really exciting to see that shift actually happening in terms of the media dollars.
Shannon, I know that you think about this a lot, and just the sheer power, emotional power of sports, but there's also a social contract that is implicit in sports fandom. Talk about how you're approaching that.
Well, it's interesting. So we just did actually a bunch of research. We announced a big partnership with Red this week, a pro bono collaboration with Red, right? Who is trying to unlock sort of a new generation of giving and gifting and helping, so the AIDS pandemic is not over and all these things. And women's storytelling is a big part of that, right? And because women and girls are most intensely impacted by the AIDS virus. So we did a bunch of primary research through Assembly that was really around Gen Z and sports and fandom. And what was really interesting is that, the main findings were around education, empowerment, and impact, right? Are you using, as an athlete or a program or as a team, are you using your sort of level of success as a way to impact communities, to impact athletes, right? We're seeing it a lot in women's sports, like women's sports are well known to be highly engaged with their fans, right? They have a social contract with those people, and the people feel the allegiance to them for that reason. But you're also seeing teams do great work in communities. We're seeing it with LA Rams, right? In our community, Hollywood Park, etc. So I think that the rise of these audiences is also driving new forms of how everyone is behaving in the space around fandom and what it means to be a fan.
Michael, I don't need to tell you, there's sports everywhere. You know, there are lots of platforms. There's almost too much to consume if you're a real sports fan, even if you're a fan of one particular team. How do you see like the CTV space and streaming, and generally platforms in general, unfolding for the sports fan, and what's important to understand?
Yeah, well, you said it, content is huge. Earlier this year at Infeeling, we released a research report called The New Sports Fan. And one big thing that was obvious was that fans, in particular, right, are very fickle when it comes to their streaming services, right? So we've seen 1/3 of them say that they've either canceled or switched their streaming service based on live sports, right? They're also getting this access to brand new sports. So we've seen an uptick on Formula One and cricket, which is exciting, and also sports adjacent content. So, right, the series of Ted Lasso, and even a documentary of Welcome to Wrexham. If you haven't watched it, I'd recommend it.
That's great.
Yeah, it's great.
It helps that Rob McElhaney and Ryan Reynolds purchased something, but that's a perfect example of taking what was a small Welsh football club and exposing it to the world, which is really exciting.
Great. Okay, so second All Play. This is definitely the conference, at least AI hype. There's a lot of conversation about it. We're talking to CMOs all week about what they're doing. But I'd love for you to, and we'll go this way now, to talk about how generative AI can be used as a service to enhance the emotional connection to sports and make fandom even more accessible and enjoyable for sports fans.
I think one thing to explore is that personalization side of how do you bring the fans closer to the team and the players without kind of being creepy in a sense. I don't know where that line is, but I think that's going to evolve because especially passionate fans, they want to be part of that team or feel part of the team or the player, and I think that's the area to start playing with AI personalization.
Yeah, I'll say it's an interesting one. We've started to do some looking around as to how we would play in there. It's an interesting one when you get into the athletes and their IP and our IP and what does that mean? I do think, going back to the point of if we're going to become a global brand though, and we played in Frankfurt last year, which was amazing, but we probably won't have an opportunity to play again for a while. How do we figure out, how do we bring the stadium experience or the live experience in some form to other countries or at scale or virtually? So something that I know the league, we're all kind of looking at. We're normally the last ones to move in terms of some of the sports, but I think it's for the right reasons to make sure how we do it is the right way and we don't end up impacting the kind of larger business.
I mean, I was going to say sort of something similar, which is just like, I think, data and research, insight, strategy will continue to be the primary components of how everyone decides to be and go to market. But I also think that for fans, it will allow actually properties, teams, athletes, once some of these kind of nuances of how do you protect likeness, we're looking at synthetic audio rights now as it relates to negotiations around talent and deals we're doing. So I think but it will allow for scale, right? It will give things that, and also sports and properties, cricket, for example, right? Things, or, the things that are also collapsing into a niche also will let them scale out globally to the fans that love them. Even though those rights might be held by a certain platform or things they can't access for a multitude of reasons. So I think it's going to give scale in terms of how you can iterate quickly and then produce and then go to market.
Plus one. Plus one. I think it comes down to practical use cases that can enable content creation that could help the commentator experience. As an example, you hit on this theme of localization, being able to extend the content and do things like dubbing and subbing in different areas, being able to look at contract rights to understand at scale how you can then start to extend and monetize that content in different geos where it may have been much more difficult to be able to understand. Scheduling is a great example of its use cases. So I think when you're thinking of generative AI use cases from an AWS perspective, we're really focused on how can we automate and bring to bear practical use cases, right? That can really unlock the creatives, right, and the talent to be able to go do their jobs.
Yeah, so, and,
Yeah.
so I actually asked AI, I was like, well, what can you do? And the top two things that came out was from a sports fan perspective, it can personalize. If you're looking something up, it will just take all of that data, synthesize it for you, and so you, in theory, you have a very quick summary of what you're looking for, if you give the right prompt. The second thing that it said is basically for companies, industries, same thing. They can take all that data of the content, like what are people actually watching, all that kind of analysis from all the different ways. It can take it and then synthesize it for you so you can actually figure out how to make better content and things like that. And that was the top two things that AI said that you could do. So I'm like, okay,
I trust
I'm
AI, way
gonna
to
trust
go.
you on that one.
Telling you.
So Grace, in our pre-interview, you mentioned something I thought was really fascinating, and the fact that they serve kombucha at Dodger Stadium.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
That makes
crazy
me
to me.
happy. Yes.
But that's really surprising. Like what are driving some of these sort of more surprising, sort of almost like playful
Sure.
brand partnerships?
Yeah. So the first thing that was done on the client side in terms of this partnership, and it's taking advantage of, well, I shouldn't say advantage, but there's a trend. Gen Z is just drinking less alcohol. Actually, they're drinking 20% on average less than millennials. So, I mean, from that perspective, that's already something that's happening. The second thing is, I mean, it's a great alternative. It's fuzzy, it's carbonated, you can buy it, it's cold, it's good for your gut, there's that health component, you know, so I think it makes sense. So at this point, you can go to Dodger Stadium and purchase it. So with Health-Aid, they also have an investor with Ryan Seacrest and iHeartRadio, so then they were able to advertise it that way. But from a media perspective, we also did out of home in terms of if people, as they were going to Dodger Stadium, letting them know that it was available, and with Uber. So if they had Uber and on their way, you know, it's like, hey, by the way, there's Health-Aid kombucha there and in stadium. So it's a way for people to know that it's available. But it's been a really popular partnership so far because people are actually looking for these drinks, and then it's a way of just letting them know that it's there.
Great. Samir, Michael sort of touched on it in terms of just the sheer amount of content.
Yeah.
And how has your definition of sports content evolved? Because you can do so much with it in terms of the production, in terms of cutting it up, you know,
Yeah.
like, you know, slowing it down. Like, how do you see almost like shoulder programming evolving around the sports proposition? And I'd love for you to talk about this as well.
So I'm going to answer it from two angles. One is the modernization of a media supply chain and the way that you can monetize against the archives of data that you have sitting in. We joked about it with like the basements. Like you've got decades and decades worth of sports footage. How do you unlock value? And then just data. So like speaking about media supply chain first, the ability now to be able to migrate vast amount of video archive content to the cloud and be able to extract scene-based metadata is a reality, and it's being powered now through the use of generative AI. In one instance, just recently, we used Amazon Bedrock in partnership with Anthropic Claude, which is another foundational model, to be able to extract things like sentiment, contextually aware elements of the scenes, and that matters because you can do things like provide automated ad break detection. You can start to look for sentiment, right, in terms of the ads that you want to play. So when we talk about contextual advertising, it makes it very, very applicable. But when you talk about slicing and dicing it, figuring out how you can take long-form content, publish a small reel of it, extend it to social, or as an example, TikTok is now doing 60 minutes, or is going to be doing 60-minute videos, right? How do you then take and package in an automated way all of these assets? And you can only do that if you're able to search and discover that content more easily. So I think that's one of the enhancements. It wasn't a Gen AI question, but I think that's the way that we're doing it from an AWS perspective specifically. And I'll give you just an example. If like an incredible play occurs like within the league, and you want to be able to find a similar video clip of Jim Plunkett doing that in 1978, and it's very specific, and there's specific brands that were associated to it, it's going to be very hard for a human to go and find that content. But if all of that is unlocked by that scene-based metadata, it just takes an analyst a minute or two to be able to search for it and find it. So that's one way. And then the second is all relative to the data. So AWS is really privileged to work with the NFL. We've got a very robust partnership. We partnered on something called the Digital Athlete, where we're analyzing 500 million multimodal points of data associated with players in the league. And we're using that and extending it to all 32 leagues and saying, use this to be able to assess the health and the safety of your players. Maybe now based off of all this data coming in, you want to like change the training regimen. So these are just like really like, you know, one's focused on monetization, one's focused on player health and safety, but like really interesting ways that you can use the data and the content that you already have to be able to unlock new possibilities.
Right. Michael, you have a background in production. How do you see sports production evolving?
Yeah, well, I would say it's multi-level in that sense. So it's really how do you take, say, in-game experiences, content, footage, and then extend it beyond, I would say, the stadium there. So that's something that we're looking into. As well as, I think, technically, I also think of production, I think of like digital technical implementation is new technologies in stadiums, right? I think that's a great area that we're seeing. So a couple examples I think that are really cool and exciting are the SoFi Infinite screen that they have, the mini screen. And another one are the NHL's exploration in these digitally enhanced dashboards. I don't know if you've seen this, but if you're at a game, you see the traditional boards on the rink, but when you're watching it, they're now starting to superimpose in real time ads that can animate on these boards. When they first launched it, it got a bad rap because players were disappearing into the ads. But they fixed it. But now it's bringing up a great opportunity for brands and teams to partner and extend that out because we've seen that fans say 50% of them will buy that brand that is sponsoring and supporting their team. So great opportunities here, I think, starting to extend that reach.
Right. Shannon, this is like the first time Cam has had a creator marketing track. I know you spend a lot of time with storytelling. How do you see influencers and creators as shaping the future of sports and specifically how fans interact with sports?
I mean, I think what's interesting is we're seeing creators and athletes diversify away from sport into culture, right? But sports is culture. Traditionally, these people that are either up and coming heroes or have been heroes for a long time are diversifying their interests into their interests, right? So they're investing, they're looking for investment, they're building companies, they are publishers in and of themselves in many ways. And so I think that what that is also enabling is this attraction of new fans, right? New opportunities for properties, leagues, and then for brands themselves to then actually participate in that, right? So it's this really interesting kind of, and very, what I would call a very fluid ecosystem at the moment, right? A lot of the athletes here in Cannes right now, and we have Sport Beach, a lot of the athletes are here not to talk because they're an athlete. They really don't want to talk about that at all. They want to talk about their business investments and what they're doing, what they're interested in doing. And that has been in sort of the form of storytelling, right? The opportunity to sit down on camera, to sit down with a brand, to sit and tell the story of why they want to do these things. Last year I interviewed Maria Sharapova. We spent the whole time talking about how she was one of the first people to go to Supergoop and say, it's the only sunscreen I can wear. I'm going to help you grow this company. They sold to BlackRock for $750 million.
Incredible.
And there you go, right? And that wasn't, we weren't talking, we talked, she's an amazing, athlete, performance, all the things, but we were here to talk about her business and her investments. And the same for creators. They are here for the same reasons. It's not about just getting more TikTok fans, right? It's like, how can I become a brand myself?
Right. So Laura, I think participation is sort of a cornerstone to any really strong fan relationship. I feel ashamed that I didn't know this was happening with the Chiefs, but you have this incredible flag football program that has allowed women to really sort of get engaged and participate. Can you tell me where that came from, where it is now? I think it's such a cool example, and do you see other teams in the league picking it up?
Yeah, I mean, I will say it's definitely at the league level one of their main priorities. I mean, when Tim Ellis, the CMO, kind of talks about 1, 2, and 3, it's within that. We have had a male flag football relationship with different organizations, YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, for a very long time. And about probably 5 or 6 years ago, you started seeing a real rise in female flag football, certainly at the youth level, but now certainly starting to grow. So 12 out of the 24 colleges that have flag football within college programs are in the Kansas City metro. As of now, Kansas and Missouri are actually not sanctioned, meaning that there are no scholarship opportunities currently in place. So it has become a huge priority of ours to get it sanctioned into states to allow for girls to have more opportunity to play. And it's positive for everyone, right? It's positive in terms of viewership, fandom, certainly from a business opportunity. A young woman that was on our ticket selling team, we brought her over. She's now the head of our girls flag football and flag football program. She played in college. So it totally changes the landscape in terms of, I think when we talk about fandom and female fans, there was a lot of things this year that certainly accelerated it. But I think that the nugget of it was already starting, and I think flag football was a big part of that. And then into the Olympics in 2026, it'll be a sport. So that will just bring it to the next level for sure.
Okay, third and final, I'll play. Again, we'll start with you, Grace. What do you think is most important to be doing now to stay competitive and relevant with fans, say, in 2 years?
I mean, I think, again, the way you consume media, I think in terms of social content, I think it's just how you use it in terms of players, fans, teams. I mean, I think that's crucial. And of course, the streaming platforms that I talked about, like, it'll be very interesting to see where that goes. You know, we didn't also talk about, like, e-games and gaming in general. I mean, that is so big with the younger generation. I think that's something that could also be, you know, just really interesting ways of growing that. So that's just an area I think that is worth paying attention to in gaming.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the future is firmly going to be interactive and immersive, and I think that's going to extend fandom to new heights. So I think as we look, like, a stat that just blows my mind, like 1/3 of the population of, like, the planet considers themselves a gamer. Like, that's a crazy amount of people who like to engage with interactivity. And if you think about a lot of the esports relative to sports content specifically, it's such a vast market. So I think that's one angle, and we touched on it earlier, but I think being really open-minded about, like, the universe of sports and what else is out there that we can incorporate. I mean, like, think about the traction F1 has had in the United States over the course of the last 4 years. You know, 10 years ago, we weren't really talking about, you know, F1 domestically, let alone 5 years ago, and now they're everywhere. And so I think being really open-minded about how you can continue to extend new types of sports into the landscape will be important.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're seeing it a lot, and I would just say, you know, I always have lived by the thesis of, like, follow the audience, right? Where are people spending time? How are they engaging? I think even looking at sport 2 years out is gonna be hard to do, actually. I think the way that things have so quickly happened over the last year, you know, last year we were talking a little bit about women's sport in Cannes.
I know.
This year, it's everywhere, right? So, and we're talking about sports that never were talked about, right? And obviously F1 was complemented by Drive to Survive,
Yep.
but you're seeing all of these stories and these sort of niche, you know, what we consider niche sports, like climbing has a huge following now that, like, you know, Alex Honnold is here, and, like, you know, you're just seeing all these sports that just typically were never sort of in the cultural zeitgeist, now in the cultural zeitgeist because they had fandom in their communities, but not a way to tell their stories, right? And so I think, and then these experiences of doing it, you know, I have 14, I always use my kids as, like, a, you know, a proxy for, like, whatever, right? I've got a 10-year-old who's in Roblox all the time, and I've got a 14-year-old who, God bless, if I can get him off his phone for a second, is just watching videos about athletes and gaming and, like, AirPodding all the time, like, all of it is, and, you know, sports, all the things, and he knows everything about every team, every athlete, and all the things. I'm like, oh my God. But watching him where he spends his time is incredibly valuable, and where my 10-year-old spends her time, incredibly valuable as an indicator of, like, also the fluidity and within they navigate the world. To them, it's just one big world, right? And it doesn't matter if it's in the digital space or the immersive space or it's in the real world, it doesn't matter. So watching them and watching these audiences is actually what's driving all of this change.
So all of it, I would say the only other thing it'll be interesting to watch as it evolves is clubs, and at least on our side, the sports are so much more than the actual just game itself now on the field. You know, we try to talk a lot at the Chiefs around, which is hard sometimes, we are a brand, and there's a lot of actually products that we have, right? Obviously, the field and the sport being the main one, but we have cheerleaders, we have 34 female athletes that are the best at what they do, that we have not even really begun to tap into in terms of brand relationships. Thinking about the beauty market with football kind of always felt like, how do you find that connection? Well, like, that might be a whole new world. Fun football being another one. Our mascots, our stadium being an event space. It's just much more complex and complicated than I think sports have given knowledge to in the past, and I think that's the really exciting part, because winning is great, but that's not a guarantee, so you gotta figure out, like, how else do we keep these fans engaged in other products, so exciting.
And I'm interested to see, I talked before about the personalization and the connection. I think that what I'm interested in personally too with 2 daughters is you're starting to see college athletes now leverage like social media and get a following and starting to build their brand, and going down another layer to even like the high school level of recruiting. So it's a really interesting space, I would say. I'm just starting to get exposed to it, but it's unbelievable out there. Unbelievable out there. So, yeah. It's exciting, so.
All right, so we're gonna close with some fun short answer questions. So the first one is, and we'll start with you, Michael. What do you think is most top of mind for today's very youngest and diverse sport fans?
Well, I think gaming is probably the biggest thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you want to play games, be part of it, experience it. The social component, I mean, I'm seeing kids now that they're watching something and on the phone at the same time and multitasking. It's really interesting. So I think the social component and surrounding them into that experience is is very valuable for them.
Dare I say Travis Kelce? I think the athletes are just, I think, fascinating, and to your point, they're so much more complex in that sense too than just what they do in terms of their core job. So I think that's where everyone's focus, and helmets are off and people are falling in love with the athletes.
Yeah, I would, it's like, in addition to what everyone else is saying, I would say sort of this notion of like a Gen Alpha, right, and 1 and 4 want to be gamers, and like your creators or whatever, but also you're sort of seeing the Gen Z folks, and a lot of it's just tied to, I think, access. They just have an expectation that wherever they go for anything they love, they will be able to access that in any form or fashion, whether it's through an actual athlete or it's through, Caitlin, watch what's happening with Caitlin Clark, right? Like, the desire to consume content around her is very strong, right? And so I think that's, and the technology is going to come into play as much as sort of the other things, the platforms and the teams and the opportunities. But I think this expectation of access to experience whatever they want to experience is going to be really important in keeping them engaged and building excitement.
So I think just carrying that thing forward, I think it's participation. So as an example, with F1, we're collecting like 1.1 million different data points from the cars, like during each race. It's a ton of data. And just recently with F1, last week during the Canada Grand Prix, we worked with them to enable the first generative AI design trophy. And that was voted on by the fan base. So you're basically taking all this data and you're making it participatory, and you're allowing the fans to be able to engage. And then the winning design was selected, and it's been unveiled. It's actually at Amazon Port if you want to check it out. It's really cool, but it was just remarkable to see that. And to your point, it's like they want access and they want to feel like they're a part of it, and we're able to do that because we're able to flip it around.
So earlier you had asked about Taylor Swift, and I don't think I got to that, but what I was thinking was ultimately it's authentic, it's storytelling. At the end of the day, we're still humans, and I think it's just that draw, that emotion, anything you can feel, however it lives in any form, if you can pull that emotion out, and that's usually through the storytelling of things. So I think that humanity aspect is big with the kids still.
Great, okay. What sports cliche needs to be discarded in order to make sports a much more equitable landscape?
Well, I think the biggest one we're talking about right now is like women in sports, right? So it's just like, are women good in sports, all that kind of stuff. And again, you're seeing the movement in terms of the dollar starting to go there. So I think that's probably the biggest one that I'm seeing right now.
I'm going to go in a different angle and just talk about cliches relative to how hard it is to produce these events. It doesn't need to be as difficult. The tools have been democratized. We just did it with the NHL. March 22nd, they produced an entire game in the cloud, and they distributed the whole thing. And that offset 2 carbon tons, right, or 2 metric tons of carbon from the environment. So I think about like sustainability benefits as well as the difficulty associated with these productions. I think that's a cliche that can go away now.
Mine kind of goes in addition to what Grace was talking about, which is, originally we were trying to get brands to really think about women's sports. It was like, well, where's the data? We don't have the data to tell the story. It's like, well, no, you're part of a movement. You're not actually, there isn't the data because we haven't invested there yet, right? So I think this notion of like, you have to be progressive in the way that you think about it if you're going to be in it, and not be like, well, we need to see all the ratings and all the things, because guess what? They didn't exist because we didn't have them. But there's enough storytelling and use cases now with like the Women's Final Four and, the WNBA and a bunch of, and WSL, right? All these things are happening that are just amazing, and it's like, no, you're part of the movement and the mission. We're not looking at the way we've always traditionally done things. That's the point.
I would add to it would be like, I think there's a perception that sometimes also storytelling in sports has to be like very deeply emotional, like deep
Right.
emotions and hardships, which is amazing, and there's many of those in the stories. But it's also meant to be fun. It's entertainment.
Yeah.
It's meant to be fun.
Yeah.
It's meant to bring people together to celebrate around it. And so I think just also finding the stories that have some lightness to them, that are just feel good and happy and funny. I just think it's something that I think we get stuck sometimes and
Crying.
like really deep, which are amazing, and I love them. But I'm like, there's so much other stuff too. Again, based on audience,
Yeah.
that is we don't have to spend years producing.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
we can get out there pretty quick.
I don't know if I can follow that up, but just from the lens of the daughters, I would say, like, you can do it, right?
Yeah.
The whole cliche, so, yeah.
All right, last question, and this is a fun one. If you could be any professional sports
Oh my
figure,
gosh, this is so
or
hard.
athlete, from any era for a day,
Ooh.
who would it be and why? And we'll start with,
Sure. I think I'd be Babe Ruth, obviously, because he's great, but it would have to be on October 1st, 1932.
Oh my
Oh
gosh.
gosh, now you're
No.
so real specific.
The reason I know this is that was the day that he infamously pointed his bat
yeah.
and called his shot. Like, to be that confident and like so cool was like, I'm gonna do it and do it. It's just like, I mean, I don't think you can top that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. I will say, which is, I'm sure cliche, but we talk a lot about, I feel like what the Bulls did in the 90s and Michael Jordan did,
Yes,
transcended.
yes.
It's a goal of ours internally. Like, there are children all around the world that are wearing Jordan jerseys that probably never even watched a Bulls game or knew anything about it. So I think what he has done for sport,
Yeah.
I don't have a specific date, but
He had
the
a few
career,
decades.
the decade, I think is a legacy worth being inspiring to.
Yeah, he was like one of my OGs. Like I wore all of his stuff.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I think actually, I think Danica Patrick would have been a very interesting athlete to be in terms of breaking into NASCAR. You know, I also like to drive fast, so apologies for the tickets or I scared you. No, but I think just being Danica Patrick would have been very fascinating at the time and now seeing what's happening with F1 Academy.
Yeah.
And like really the sense of joy that she must have around how far female racing has come and what you're seeing now happening. So, Danica Patrick.
My parents were watching, so I feel like I'm going to be in a lot of trouble if I don't say Black Mamba, Kobe Bryant, rest in peace, and Messi. I just think that they've also, they transcend, so.
Yeah, I would say Jordan, and I would say the slam dunk competition from the free
that was so
throw
good.
line when he just flew in. I've had dreams, and I woke up and I was like, oh, well,
That
that was a happy dream today.
Right.
Jim, who would you be?
I'd be Pele.
Pele.
At any day between 1960s, 1965.
Yeah.
Awesome.
He
To
was
play that game
amazing.
for a day would be
Beautiful
great.
game.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I think we're finished. So,
Great.
Thank you.
Laura, Shannon, Grace, Samira, and Michael, thank you so much. You guys weathered the storm.
Thank you.
Rather
Thank
than-
you. Yeah, there's
And,
like real.
so thanks for your thought leadership. It was great.